Hello there and welcome to today's video. There has been just an absolute deluge, it seems like, of news articles relating to autism and ADHD recently. So I'm going to go through a few of them, starting with Uta Frith speaking with The Times. Now, I really wanted to read the full article, but I haven't been able to because if you subscribe to The Times, you have to then ring their offices to cancel your subscription, which as an autistic person fills me with horror, so I'm just not prepared to do it. So I'm going to be using essentially a screenshot that I found on the internet, which isn't ideal, but you know, they should make unsubscribing a whole lot easier. So a chap called Andrew Billen interviews Uta Frith, and he says, I mentioned the naturalist Chris Packham, who I interviewed a few years ago. He was diagnosed in 2005 with what was then called Asperger's syndrome. I do find it interesting that he chose Chris Packham, of all people, as an example here, as Chris is an environmentalist, he's pro-wildlife, he's pro-animals, and all of the stuff that, you know, the Times isn't known for reporting on in a positive way, usually speaking. He cannot be autistic, in my opinion, Frith interrupts. It is just absolutely absurd to me that somebody who can communicate as brilliantly as he does, that is what I call a blatant contraindication. Well, I frankly find it absurd that Uta thought this was in any way appropriate to share this opinion that an autistic man isn't autistic, and to essentially point at Chris and tell the world that she doesn't think he's autistic. It is absolutely offensive and completely unprofessional for a supposed expert in autism to think that this is okay. I'm going to refer to the ICD-11 here, which autism assessors use in England. Some individuals with autism spectrum disorder are able to function adequately in many contexts through exceptional efforts, such that their deficits may not be apparent to others. A diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder is still appropriate in such cases. And I know the language here is less than ideal in respect of deficits and disorder, but the fact remains that because Chris can communicate well, doesn't make him any less autistic, or indeed not autistic, as Uta proclaims. Many of us communicate really well, but it often comes at a cost. I know for me, as somebody who masks, it is exhausting whenever I communicate with other people, and I always need time to recover. But this is the bit that's missing from Uta's frame of reference. She really doesn't get this whole idea of autistic masking at all, and I don't know why she's so resistant to finding out information about this. Surely, as a scientist, she should have a curious mind about these kinds of things. So the screenshot I have goes on to say, from the interviewer, but talking to him, I say, I found him a bit literal-minded. If you pay him a compliment, he takes it as face value. It's part of that charming personality. I mean, he probably is a bit obsessive, she says. He may relate better to animals than people, Uta's asked. I think we could just say people are animals too. Is it just me? Honestly, I don't understand what she means here. He may relate better to animals than people. I think we could just say people are animals too. Well, people are animals, but I don't know. If you understand what she means here, please let me know in comments, because it has honestly gone over my head completely. Anyway, going back to obsessions or special interests, the ICD-11 states, as part of its diagnostic criteria, persistent preoccupation with one or more special interests. And of course, Chris has basically established a whole career on the back of his special interests. I remember watching him on the Really Wild show in the 80s, which I loved because he was educating children about animals. So it's clear he has had this special interest in respect of obsession with animals and the environment for his whole life. It's good to see that Gina Rippon, who is another expert in autism, come to the defence of Chris Packham here by talking about his autobiography, in which he talks about his experiences of being an autistic child. It's one I haven't read actually, so it's one for me to add to the list, and perhaps Uta should add it to her list too. The next story I want to talk about is around Max Pemberton, and Max is an NHS psychiatrist, and he was diagnosed with ADHD and has since decided he doesn't have ADHD because he took his medication, and an hour after I swallowed the tablets, I walked down to my local shop, and the man behind the counter, who I talk to often, said something to me and I said nothing back. I stood there and looked at him, and I could see him working out whether he had offended me. The next day I had to go back and apologise. So there's no mention of any kind of titration here, in terms of starting off small with medication and then building up, which many of us have to do. And of course, many people with ADHD will have to try a few medications before they find something that works for them. So to try one tablet and then decide that you haven't got ADHD seems utterly ridiculous to me. And although Max is trying to speak with some kind of authority here as a psychiatrist, he's not an expert in ADHD. Max is also the creator and presenter of The Great ADHD Myth, which aired on Channel 4 this week. Unsurprisingly, it's already had lots of backlash because it's packed with biased, unscientific nonsense and presents a single case study of ADHD. There's a young boy that features. It had zero mention of adults who live with ADHD, so I think that any argument that Max had fell absolutely flat. Also, the one neuroscientist that Max spoke to said of her experience, "My interview was hours long and they cherry-picked the bits that suited their push for presenting ADHD as a myth. Biased programs like this one that push their view of ADHD as a mythical entity are irresponsible and will have detrimental effects." And there are some interesting quotes on the press release by Channel 4. "It is certainly not a medical condition as far as I'm concerned," says Dr. Iona Heath, former president of the Royal College of GPs. And Iona, who is clearly not an expert in ADHD, has told The Telegraph that she would happily ban the label ADHD. "We've replaced corporal punishment with giving children a pill," says Dr. Sami Tamimi, consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist and psychotherapist. And according to his website, Sami is actually now retired. He has a Sunday Times Book of the Year to sell, and he seems to suggest that ADHD and autistic traits may well be explained as being entirely normal in other parts of the world. And Liam Humphreys, who is the executive producer, said Max Pemberton's investigation into the dramatic rise in ADHD diagnoses results in some startling revelations and a film that promises to make viewers think very differently about how we are medicating a generation of children. And this kind of rhetoric is, of course, really dangerous because the makers of this documentary and Max Pemberton will know that these kinds of viewpoints will be parroted across the UK and beyond, in workplaces, in family settings, and in schools. It also dismisses and invalidates the lived experience of people with ADHD and really discourages people from seeking out diagnosis and indeed seeking medication where appropriate. But it is really important to state that not everybody with ADHD will choose to take medication. I don't. The charity ADHD UK has done some really great work in challenging all of this, and they've made it super easy to complain to Ofcom, and I'll link the information down below. And just for reference, I don't think you need to live in the UK to complain. So although the media seem to be ramping up in their stories about autism and ADHD, all with a negative light, so that they're belittling the experience of neurodivergent people, Of course, this is nothing new when it comes to the media and vulnerable groups. Trans people have been consistently attacked in the news over the last decade, and it's recently led to some ridiculous and unworkable guidance around toilets. And in terms of intersectionality, I think it's important to state that trans, non-binary and gender diverse people are up to 6 times more likely to be autistic. So it seems to me that autism and ADHD are both well in the frame now for endless media attacks. And in fact, over recent months, there has been so many stories on autistic and ADHD people getting disability payments unnecessarily, which is utterly ridiculous. In England, we have what's called PIP, which is personal independence payments. It's our disability payments, and it is impossible to even meet the criteria, let alone go through the process, which is known to be dehumanising. It is a really stressful experience for people to go through, and it's designed to be, because then it is off-putting to people to go through the process and to apply for this this benefit. And as somebody who is disabled, I'm autistic and have ADHD, but I also have a number of health issues that prevent me from working. I don't meet the criteria for PIP, so I don't get PIP. So I don't understand where this narrative is coming from, because very many autistic people and ADHD people don't meet the criteria for disability payments, even though many of us should be eligible for some kind of financial support. We know that autistic people really struggle with work, and many of us are either unemployed or underemployed because we don't have the accommodations that we need set in place in the workplace. And maybe I should do a deep dive on PIP at some point on my channel, because there is so much misinformation out there with regard to disability payments here in the UK. It is so hard to get any kind of financial support. And the last story I'm covering today is around Jason Arday. And Jason was a black autistic professor at Cambridge University, and he was accused of plagiarising parts of his PhD by Nathan Coffness. And Jason was cleared of these claims, but he still resigned his post as professor. And the press decided that wasn't enough, because articles about him only snowballed, and these articles weren't in the public interest. All they did was absolutely publicly humiliate Jason, and Jason died last Friday. At the time of his resignation, Jason said that he was at the limits of what anybody should have to endure, but still the articles followed. Many people were publicly raising alarms about Jason's treatments through this press coverage, such as Simon Baron-Cohen, who told the press in no uncertain terms about Jason's vulnerabilities as an autistic man. And you'll see here what Elon Musk thought of this tweet. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's clear to me we need robust press regulation here in the UK, because Jason should never have had to face this level of scrutiny. And as this graph shows, although the main offenders were the Telegraph and the Times, this barrage of so-called news reporting, or rather a bullying campaign against a black autistic man, was coming from various mainstream news outlets. Even The Guardian was writing about Jason after his resignation, and it begs the question why. Interestingly, the aforementioned Dr. Max Pemberton also wrote about Jason in his Daily Mail column, speculating on his mental health, even though he'd never met Jason, which is, of course, completely unethical. Everything about this story and all of the events that led up to Jason's death are sickening. I think it's very clear that Jason was considered an easy target because he was black, working class, and autistic. The Good Law Project, who were working with Jason before his death, are demanding a public inquiry, And if you'd like to add your signature to the letter which will be sent to the Prime Minister, I'll leave details down below. So I think that's where I'm going to end today's video. I think ultimately it really is about autistic and ADHD people finding community, such as spaces like YouTube and other social media platforms, because it's really important to talk to people who understand. I think we all appreciate how difficult things can be, and particularly when there are lots of stories in the press about autism and ADHD, it can feel really overwhelming. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.